everyone. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. So, if you're watching on YouTube, if you could please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or if you're listening on Spotify, you can always follow us there. Every like and share and subscribe can help our channel to be seen by many more Stargate fans. So, we really appreciate it. And then we also have all of our socials listed up on the screen right now if you wish to follow us there. Okay, thank you, and I hope you enjoy. Bye. And to all the Stargate fans out there, we would love to hear from you and chat with you on our show. So if you're interested in doing that, please reach out to us via any of our social media platforms or email.
I thought it would be really cool to talk about some crossover episodes because now that we've gotten both far enough along in SG-1 and Atlantis, we've already seen some episodes where SG-1 either interacts with Atlantis or Atlantis interacts with SG-1. One of the biggest examples of this, I think is this episode from season 10. I think it's episode 3, the Pegasus Project. So maybe we can talk about that. Before we delve into it, just inviting everyone, if you have any fandom related art, cool things you want to share with us, cool things you want to have us show or talk about on the podcast, please hit us up in the comments, contact us on our socials. We're always really interested in what other people are doing, especially independent creators. It's very interesting to us. But now let's talk about Pegasus Project. And maybe I'll have you start with your thoughts on it, because I will have two thoughts, one related to the first time I watched it when I wasn't watching Atlantis, and then when I watched it when I was watching Atlantis. But you actually said you just rewatched it, so maybe you have some very fresh thoughts.
Do we need to do like a brief thing of what the whole episode is about first, or just start going into our thoughts?
Sure, maybe we can. I'll just quickly say, Pegasus Project was an episode in season 10, and in this case, at the time it was Atlantis season 3, so it was kind of co-running with Atlantis season 3, and SG-1 at this time were looking for the Sun Graal to help them basically defeat the Ori and kind of conclude their war with the Ori in some way. And one of the things that SG-1 did was travel to Atlantis. And also, I think at the same time, not only were they working with this Sun Graal, but there was some situation, and you can go into a little bit more detail about this, where they had to deal with Ori and Wraith ships and blow up. Were they blowing up the Supergate there or something similar, something like this? Yes, because I remember Carter working with McKay.
Yeah, I think they were trying to stop the Supergate from.
Yeah,
I was actually honestly a little bit confused, because by the end it's activated and they seem confused by being activated. So I think they were trying to close the Supergate without the Ori becoming aware of the Supergate, basically. Yeah,
but it didn't
make sense.
Yeah, exactly. So there were kind of two separate storylines going on in that episode with Daniel and Weir, and then also Carter and with McKay. And so maybe you can share some of your thoughts, having recently seen it.
Yeah. So I just watched it again before we met up today, because I wanted to refresh my horrible memory of the episode, because currently we are on the beginning of season 5 for Stargate Atlantis, and so I've never went back to any of the Stargate SG-1 episodes. And so for me, first off, it was kind of interesting in the sense of I've always been watching everything in order. And so as soon as I went back to that, it's kind of different for me, because I haven't gotten back to any of the SG-1 episodes. And so immediately I felt very nostalgic, just seeing all of the SG-1 and hearing the music. And it was just I was just oh, I miss this. And something that really stood out to me was in the beginning of the episode, all of the different dynamics of different characters. And so it just kind of initially my reaction of watching it this time, because I was watching it just to kind of refresh my memory, I think I was noticing certain things that maybe I didn't notice when I first watched it the other time that I watched it. And so part of it was just noticing the dynamics between how McKay is with the
Mm-hmm.
rest of SG-1 and how he's with Samantha Carter. And he's kind of in this episode, the version of himself where he's still very, very like sarcastic and very like full of himself and always thinking like he's right and like finding ways to impress Samantha Carter. And it's just like really funny to see that again, because I feel like as the uh seasons go on with McKay in particular, he changes where he's a little bit more, he's not as how, I can't think of the right word, but he doesn't seem to get so irritated by people, and like he
Mm-hmm.
seems to be a little bit more open to hearing other people's opinions of fixing things, and he kind of interacts with each person slightly differently.
Yep.
Um and I guess a little bit more of a mature way. And so with this, he's not at that point yet. So it's just really funny to see all of the different characters from both Atlantis and SG-1 kind of being in a room together and meetings and stuff, and just thinking, oh my god, this guy, like, like it's
Mm-hmm.
like, Mitchell just constantly is rolling his eyes whenever McKay speaks. And
Yes.
Vala, previously didn't understand certain jokes of sarcasm as they're traveling to Atlantis. And then when she just really didn't understand something he said, McKay thinks, oh, you're making fun of me. Like, because he's so used to people making fun of him and getting annoyed. And she's just like, no, I actually just didn't understand what you were saying. I'm not from Earth, um, and so, and then he's like, oh well, and then like he wants to go and explain it, and they're just like, no, no. And like, and then Carter really feels like she needs his help. And then as soon as he hears that she wanted him on the team to begin with to help with everything, like, he puffs out his chest and is super arrogant. So that was like the initial things of like the dynamics. And then as you continue through the episode, then like there's other really cool dynamics of characters, like with like Daniel and Vala when they're speaking in that room to the person that's supposed to be like a holographic image of someone on from like the ancient, or no, the, yeah, the ancient, the ship, the Stargate Atlantis, like supposed to be like a previous person, but really it's
One of the original
Morgan.
Atlanteans. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Morgan Le Fay, right? That like she's like an ascended being that is like trying to give Daniel a message and isn't supposed to. And so like that whole dynamic too, it's just like, I don't know, I just think like they do so well with like the interaction between characters in this episode. Like some of it, like the whole episode, Daniel and Vala are pretty much just standing in that room. You could imagine that being incredibly boring, but just like the dialogue and everything within that, like it, and I know that's talking more about like an outside view of it, but that was just kind of my thought, I guess, like is kind of really noticing all those dynamics, and then piecing together, like, when I watched it previously, like how it ties into the story of what's happening at the time, and trying to like remember all of that. And um yeah, that's, I mean, I don't know how far you want me to go with it, but that's basically my initial reaction, is my point. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
good point to have you have your initial reaction too, so I'm not just babbling the whole time.
Well, what's interesting, I think, about your initial reaction, and I think I can relate it to how I'll, is that you are coming from the perspective of having watched it once and then watching it in a such circumstance where you're kind of further along in Atlantis and you're going back to seeing the Atlantis characters and their progression too, which is really interesting. Like you mentioning how McKay is a little bit different and certain things, and observing those character dynamics, that was really interesting. So like
Mm.
when I watched it the first time, of course I really liked the episode the first time I watched it, but I didn't watch Atlantis at that time. The first time I watched only SG-1 all the way through was a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
And then I did one time a watch through of SG-1 and then Atlantis concurrently. I guess this last time I was watching it. And I agree that it's like so interesting because there's so many things you see and realize when you're like watching them concurrently. Because I mean, on the one level, you understand the location, you understand what's going on. That room with Morgan Le Fay, you've seen it before, you've seen the interface, you're familiar with Weir, you're familiar with those character dynamics. And actually there's a whole level of like humor that I think is brought in when you have the understanding of the character dynamics. And having seen things like, you know, McKay bringing up that he, you know, that Carter helped him with something. Well, when you're not watching Atlantis, you didn't see Grace under pressure. You don't know about that. It adds this
Right.
whole other layer of intrigue. And I remember when I watched it the first time, of course, like this whole, I was always really into the storyline with the Ori and the Sangral and all of like, I really loved season 9 and 10 of SG-1. Like I actually thought it was kind of a nice sort of refreshing new enemy and circumstance and lore, basically. And so I really liked the episode, but I liked it just so much more when there is this kind of aspect where you have these other characters you're kind of familiar with and they're encountering these other characters that you're familiar with and you already love the dynamics of both. And it's kind of, it's like the end dynamics of Stargate where like they all are really, the characters are really established, but it's for Atlantis it's kind of still a little young, like it's only the beginning of season 3, but yet they're established enough that you kind of know, like you kind of get it, like you get it when like Shepard makes a certain joke about something, or like what you were describing with McKay and Vala, it makes so much sense, like and it's like it has this layer of like humor and interest that I found it was just very well done in terms of it not feeling like fan service, but really truly being fan service in a way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you also bring up a really good point about talking about like when you've watched it the first time where it was just SG-1 that you watched, and then when you watched it again, it was SG-1 and Atlantis together. Like that was also the same as me in the sense that I was forgetting like way back when I first watched it, I hadn't watched Atlantis. I don't honestly remember what I thought when I got to that episode. Probably I was very confused because I had never seen any of those people. I was probably just really confused. So I don't remember my initial reaction when I very, very first saw it because I've watched SG-1 and Atlantis before we started doing the rewatch for like this podcast and everything. I'd only watched all of that once. And so then, you know, I rewatch, it was in like order with Atlantis. So then you're right, you do notice things with storylines that otherwise you're completely blind to. When you're not watching it together, you don't even know the characters. And I also like, how did you feel about seeing like Weir again? Because like I like really miss her, and I didn't realize just how much, because as soon as like I saw her in it too, it was kind of like also that nostalgic feeling of like, oh, she's back, like she's so good, like I'm so sad and mad that she's gone.
Yeah, no, I had that, like I have, it's the same for me, like I really somehow this dynamic, I really do enjoy season 4 and 5 of Atlantis, but this dynamic of like season 3 of Atlantis and like season 10 of SG-1, where I think in both actually a lot of things were kind of coming together, because I think it's also the same one, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it season 3 also where they have in Atlantis the return? No, it is season 3. Okay, I was right, because I was going to say like somehow like season 3 of Atlantis and season 10 of SG-1, it kind of feels like to me there it had the most communication between the two series, because there were the most crossover episodes, because of course there's this, and I mean I know the return isn't really a crossover, but kind of is, because then you have O'Neill there. And so I think because of that you feel like, okay, O'Neill left after season 8, but somehow in that year, like if you watch both Atlantis and SG-1, there's a lot more O'Neill. You have all of the new cast members in both, and plus a lot of the, so you have a lot of the old cast members and new cast members. And in SG-1, I think because it was last season, there were also a lot of bringing back cast members from like alternate realities and stuff. So I feel like I just remember thinking like that it was very enjoyable, like this whole thing in a way of both being culmination and nostalgia at the same time. And I mean I do appreciate that, like with the Pegasus Project, for example, you can watch it without needing to be a crossover, but just if you watch it like, and you have already that the experience of watching Atlantis, it just adds so much more to it. Yeah, I really like overall this whole, like that whole collective seasons, I just love the
Yeah.
mingling between the two shows.
Yeah, I think it worked out really, really well. And I think, that all goes to, again, like we've always says, how well the writing is, and probably also how they edit it together and everything, really. But I feel like that kind of thing I would imagine can be really tricky to do, like where it meshes so well. And so it's probably a culmination of everything, like the actors and their chemistry and all these things that have to come into place for it to work. Because like I just feel like all of that was like perfect, like you said, like by that point it's season 10 of SG-1, like all of them, just their dynamics together are like perfect. And and then there's that newness of Atlantis, but their dynamics are also great. And then combining it, they did it in a really smart way too, because it isn't like they tried to have everyone that you've ever seen in Atlantis on the show. It was like
Mhm.
mainly McKay for a lot of it. And then it was like you barely saw Shepard. It was just like a tiny little jokey kind of moment about him telling Mitchell about the lemon, and how if McKay
Mhm.
annoys him, like just hand him this lemon. Like, and you see a little bit of Weir for it to make sense, right? Obviously, you would see her, but a lot of it really is McKay. And then even like with Teal'c, like you see him a little bit, like he's just kind of out in his own little ship, next to the what do you call it, the Supergate,
Mhm.
and and then it's that episode in particular is left very open-ended too, right? So it's like by the end of it, um had you not seen anything that happens after, you're left hanging, you're left not knowing what's going to happen. Like they basically are able, they're aiming to get the Wraith ship out of the way and take that down. And then by accident, from doing that, something to do with the way it worked with the gate, like it ended up being that they also took the whole Ori ship down, which they didn't know they had taken down. Like that
Mhm.
was totally an accident. And so it kind of then leaves this like ominous kind of like ending where you're like, oh crap, like what's gonna happen now? They've taken out a whole Ori ship. There's this massive gate, like the lady, what's her name, is her name Morgan Le Fay, I think.
Mhm.
How like she like tries basically to get the only reason they knew of like the Wraith ship was because of the information she gave to Daniel, who
Mhm.
then the information then got to Teal'c, and then Teal'c gave it to Carter and all of them in the Odyssey.
Mhm.
And so like yeah, it's just like interesting how it's like really, like if you think about it scene wise, like there's mainly them on the ship with McKay, there's Daniel and Vala in the other little room, and that's a lot of what goes back and forth. Besides then you see like other like little aspects, so it's just done really well, you know
Yeah.
um
I mean, I think
and
it's
yeah.
interesting because one thing you brought up was how entertaining the scene in the room with Morgan Le Fay is with Fala and Daniel, even though they were just in a room and it was
Yeah.
just like the two of them. And I mean, I completely agree. I also think it's funny because one of my favorite um parts of that episode is just when they are first all in the debriefing room together, and you kind
Yeah.
of first get this um impressions of SG-1 meeting the Atlantis team, and somehow with just this limited amount of dialogue and time they're able to like somehow make all the banter and jokes that like need to be there, and it's just like nothing that's really happening, all they're doing is like talking about things, debriefing, and but it's just brilliant and it's entertaining
Yeah.
to watch. And I think that's
Yeah.
100% on like the dialogue and the character development and how they interact with each other. So I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think it was done so well because like immediately it pulls your interest in, because I feel like it could have went really badly. Like it could have been something that was done in a way that, like you said, is just for the fans, and it's done in kind of like this way that it doesn't feel like it meshes well. But like everything to me, like going back and watching it, I'm glad I watched it before we talked, because like I couldn't fully remember everything that was in that episode. And like going back to it, it's just really interesting, especially when you're going back to watch it as a way of knowing you're going to be discussing it. I feel like you sometimes, like for me as a viewer, like I notice certain things that maybe I wouldn't have noticed like when I was just watching it through. And so like definitely like that all immediately like catches your like the viewer engagement, right? Like as soon as you get into that room where they're all talking, and like it's just like I really do miss like some of those elements now, like how McKay is with certain people, like because McKay is one of my, I mean, I guess all of them are my favorites in different ways, but McKay is
Mm-hmm.
certainly one of my favorites. And
Totally, yeah.
and like yeah, so it's just like really funny like to see how he grates on people's nerves. And um I don't know if part of it's because I've also had a little bit of a break of watching Atlantis and are just kind of now slowly getting back into getting into season 5, that like I feel like that same type of dynamic with McKay isn't like fully there. Like it's still like really good, and it's still in a different way. It's just like that's before his character has went through a lot of stuff, and so he hasn't learned from
Yeah.
all of that and kind of changed his ways slightly. And um another thing I thought was interesting was, so in this episode, how he is with Carter,
Mm-hmm.
because that's kind of how he also was way before Atlantis, when you first are introduced to him in SG-1.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
and then like we said like a while ago when we were talking about this, how initially like McKay just seems like an ass, right? Like when you first are introduced to that character, and then when you actually see him in Atlantis, like there's a lot more to him, and he's a lot more likable, I think. And so like it's interesting in this episode, it's kind of a blend of that asinine McKay mixed with like the likable elements. And then gradually like as that continues, like he becomes more of like the kinder, more heartfelt elements of his character that you don't initially see. And so then when Carter eventually becomes head of Atlantis, like it's interesting because like it's interesting how like immediately he kind of goes into that role of respecting that hierarchy, like
Mm-hmm.
because initially he's so catty towards her.
Yes,
And
it's so
so like you
true.
would almost imagine it, I would almost imagine like if he was still in that mindset of him being like almost like not willing to admit that she's like in charge, and kind of
Yep.
being mad about that. And so it's interesting like that time frame of when she is like in charge, like he doesn't necessarily fight against that too much. Whereas if you were to find him in the time frame of the episode we just watched, I feel like he would have like threw a whole tantrum. Like,
Oh, totally, totally. And he would have like fought her on everything. I mean, I think part of that is like I feel, especially until when he started dating the botanist, he really, there was this tension between the two of them that was just like always there. And I think the reason he behaved the way he did towards Carter, even in the very beginning, like even like when I rewatch it, I really can see it even more, is that he was just super like, on the one hand, he has this insecurity about himself, but also like a hyper security about himself. But then he's also like really into her. But he probably also knows she's just as smart as, if not smarter than him. I mean, in some things, I'm sure she's smarter than him, just like in some things, I'm sure he's smarter than her. They're kind of like probably evenly matched, thing to thing.
mhm.
But I'm sure he feels like both threatened by that and like he also is threatened by the fact that he probably like has some kind of chemistry with her. And I thought it was very interesting because even in the first episode he appears, where he's totally like starts out with an ass, he makes that whole I wanted to be a pianist thing, where he tells her how he's just so technical and not doing any art, and like her science is like she thinks differently, basically, is what he's telling her.
Yeah.
So he kind of does get it out. And I think I really, really love how they had McKay's character in Atlantis, because yeah, he's still McKay, but they really kept his like, you know, they kept the sarcasm and this behavior and this like somehow like slight arrogance, but like trying, it's like overcompensation because there's probably also some insecurity. But yet they also gave him this huge human side. And I think part of that was also when they introduced his sister, and you realize his
Mm-hmm.
sister is like actually way smarter than him even.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
like maybe that's why he's also partially insecure. I mean, uh but it's like it's very I found like I would find the situation of looking back, because when you describe his character and how he kind of progressed forwards, um when I think about it and when I'm watching it, it's like I don't really notice it. But when you bring this up, I kind of mentioned, yeah, that's right. Actually, he really did have this relationship with Carter, like where he had this kind of weird chemistry. And I could also see a scenario in season 4, especially if he wasn't on different relationships and was kind of more still interested in Carter, where there was more banter. But maybe
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to not put that at the foreground of the show at that point. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I could also see it working really well at the same time. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, as you're talking about all of this and how like in depth like the character development is too. Like I think that actually kind of goes back to a previous video we did about talking about movies and series and like what kind of like what we preferred. And like I think that's why I also just really love Stargate as a series so much more, is because of that fact that like the character development, they can go so much more in depth um into that character, that you feel so much more from like that performance than you can um like I mean, yes, in the movies like it's viewers that have seen them in the series, but it's just like I just feel like the actors are just so good. And like I think like I can't imagine like anyone else being like those characters. And like could
Totally.
you
Yeah.
imagine anyone else being McKay? Like I can't,
No.
and it's um like even going back to like how I was talking about like Daniel and Vala, being in that room, like the expression even like that they have on their faces as they're speaking about all sorts of different things. And it's like, I mean, that to me like really shows like good acting ability is when you can just see like the littlest look in their eye and things like that just give off so much emotion. And I think that's what all of these like actors do so like wonderfully, that really also pulls you in. So to have them all like clumped into one episode, I think that's why it's just like, oh.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, honestly, that's one of the reasons why I mean, I already, like I said, I already loved the episode before I had gotten into the to Atlantis, because I'm already a big fan. I know a lot of people maybe have issues with season 9 and 10 or the Ori arc, but I really liked it, because it's like we had all this ancient kind of lore for a long time, and then we moved into kind of more like it's kind of coming from medieval or in like lore kind of more. I mean, when you think about where it's
Yeah.
drawn out of. And so it's kind of cool and refreshing to have a different brand of lore. Um, and so I actually already really liked it. And I liked their conversation with like Morgan Le Fay. Like that's one of like the best like parts of it to me. Like it's somehow interesting, even though yeah, nothing is happening really, but it's so cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but watching it like again, it's just their interactions, and they're not overdone. Like I think that's one of the things that as I was thinking about it, and like they have like little subtleties of them, but it's not like in this overcooked way where it's over the top.
Yeah.
And like even like just this little conversation with Carter and McKay where he says, oh, you helped me through a dark time, which it's actually like in a way it's really heavy, like what happened to him. And like it's interesting that he reached out for Carter, and it's kind of like heartfelt in a way, and it's almost like he's being emotional, but then she's like, was I naked? and it's like she was, and so it kind of creeps back into that, but it's like it's not over the top, it's just a little subtle thing where it's like, oh, McKay is having an emotional moment, but he's also still McKay, right? Like, so I think there's so
Yeah.
many of those little things, and there were just so many little, like you brought up the thing about Vala and McKay, like where, you know, it kind of it's bringing up her, like how she is always with this kind of earth stuff that she like doesn't know, and then like it's just so interesting to me how all of that was done. Like I can't imagine that would have been easy to write. Like
Yeah.
they did a really good job.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just how they deliver the lines too, like how they deliver the things that they're saying work so perfectly, because it's kind of like, if you think about it, like Vala could have been like mad when
Mm-hmm.
McKay reacts, like immediately he's like getting defensive and immediately he's out to like attack because like he thinks he's being made fun of, and like so immediately he's feeling defensive, and so like, and she just stays kind of very level headed and just says, well, no, that's actually like, I just didn't know, like, and then he, instead of like then getting kind of like, you know, weird about it, then immediately he's gonna go and like explain himself and stuff. And so like, um yeah, it's just really cool. Like I really enjoyed that episode. I had um again not fully remembered it, so I'm glad you had mentioned it as one that could be really interesting for us to talk about, because like it has so much in it that I think is worth talking about. And um you know, I'm curious like what other people's thoughts are on some of the stuff that we mentioned, if they get kind of got the same thing out of it. um and two, like you also mentioned like the connection with the Grace Under Pressure episode with McKay, and like that one too, like I just like, that's one of my favorite
Mm-hmm.
episodes. Like I just think it amazes me like how it's kind of like the equivalent of, if you've ever seen the movie The Telephone Booth or something like that with Colin Farrell. It's like amazes me when it's like like a whole thing is basically done by one actor and it can
Mm-hmm.
carry that whole thing. So it's like in the movie with Colin Farrell, it's like the whole thing's him in this telephone booth, and it's like a really good movie and like very intense, but it's just him in a freaking telephone booth. Like that's it. Like it's like this action based kind of thing. And it's like with McKay and Grace Under Pressure, like yes, there is Carter that comes into it later as kind of his um you know, like he's hallucinating her, but like prior to that, a lot of it's just him. I mean, I think there are other scenes here and there where like I think like other members are trying to figure out how to help him, but
Yeah.
like so there are like little clips of other scenes, but mainly it's driven by McKay's character and everything that he shows. And like um he goes through so many emotions in that, that it just amazes me. There's just so much there
Yeah.
that like it's just so good.
Yeah. No, I completely, I mean, interesting because this is like it's like a multi-leveled crossover, Grace Under Pressure, because one, there's Carter there in this situation with McKay, but it's also a reference to the episode Grace, where Carter goes through something similar. And like it's also
Yeah.
another heavy emotional episode where it's just Carter and she's on the ship, and then people keep coming to her. And I mean, in this situation, it's very interesting because for her, it's like she's making also some realizations as the about her situation, but also about her life as the, you know, she's seeing the people. And I think that kind of happens with McKay, but yeah, it's only Carter, which is very interesting. Like I find that also very interesting about his character. And um it also kind of makes me wonder about the, like, you know, the further development of things, and um if there are other directions the character could have gone, like McKay's character, in terms of, you know, not necessarily his relationship with Carter ever becoming a relationship, but um almost like a dating relationship. But you know, I wonder the dynamic. I think like it could have been, there could have been something explored there more deeply during season 4, I think, between the two of
Mhm.
them, because there was so much kind of depth to their relationship when you really think about it, but they didn't really have a whole lot of screen time together. So it could have been an
Yeah.
opportunity for that. It's just, I think at that point, then the McKay character had kind of uh, grown, but it could have been very interesting. But yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting crossover episodes, because it's so subtle, but it's so deep, and it's like a reference to another episode. And but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's maybe one of the earlier ones. I know there were some in season 2 that had kind of like when they went home. I think that was in season 1 already, and there were some people from SG-1, and so there were some kind of like references in other crossover episodes. But I feel like Grace Under Pressure was the first kind of really major crossover episode where it was like very deep. And then Pegasus Project was probably one where it completely set the tone for the whole season, and it set up like everything in SG-1. But I think it also really established this season there's going to be like some dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it led to, I mean, you already have the big two-parter then in Atlantis, which is the crossover with, and I mean, maybe we can touch on this because I said, you know, it's good to also talk about some other ones that interest us. But in the return, O'Neill and Woolsey are, I mean, of course, there's a bunch that happens in SG-1 in this episode because the Atlanteans come back, and then like, anyways, the city, it's like taken over by replicators. But then some of it is happening in SG-1, but then actually O'Neill and Woolsey go to Atlantis, and I think that's actually brilliant.
Yeah.
There is so many
Yeah.
good moments in that of like dialogue and quotable moments, and
Exactly. That again, it's like the dynamics between the characters are so good, and that's what like really makes it like, yes, the story is like really intriguing and stuff, but like, yeah, I love O'Neill and Woolsey together. Like they just crack me up. It's almost like the equivalent of O'Neill and what's his name? Oh my gosh, his face is in my mind. Oh my god, the guy we were just talking about him. Um okay, this is the oddest thing all day today when I'm thinking back about Stargate. The actors' names are flying into my head and not the characters, and the characters' names are flying out of my head. But the McBeath guy, Tom McBeath, I think is his
oh yeah,
actor.
Mayborn.
Mayborn. It's the weirdest thing. Suddenly I have the knowledge of what their real names are and their fake names
That's
have shot
amazing.
out my ear. It's the most bizarre thing that doesn't
That is
normally happen.
amazing.
But yeah, like Woolsey and O'Neill is kind of like a similar like dynamic as Mayborn and O'Neill. And you know, at least that's what I kind of feel. Like it's kind of like O'Neill's character is always getting kind of like irritated by the other one, but yet like I don't know. It's just it's a funny dynamic. I don't fully remember a lot of what happens in those episodes, so maybe you can remind me, but I do remember it being a case of like O'Neill having to go there and him and Woolsey trying to fix things, and then he had given like an order to not do anything like if something didn't work, and then like um
Yeah.
again I'm forgetting characters' names, but Joe Flanagan's character
Shepherd.
um
Shepherd.
Shepherd, yeah. Then they end up near the end of that, I think, come over and help, and they weren't supposed to. Like they were supposed to let the place like blow up, right, or something like that. That's my memory of it because I didn't
Yeah.
review that one.
Which I personally love. I mean, I would have to, since we're not talking in depth about it, I would have to also refresh. But I mean, I think it's safe to say, like, yeah, I think it's like McKay, Shepherd, basically the Atlantis team. They come and, in a way, rescue O'Neill and Woolsey from basically about to being blown up because the replicators took over the city, and they make a plan to subvert the replicators. But I absolutely love it because the duo of Woolsey and O'Neill is so brilliant, because in a way it is very similar to Mayborn, but like with the difference that Mayborn is like it's like you have these classic duos of O'Neill. You have O'Neill and Daniel, which is like O'Neill with the archaeologist scientist person, where it's always like the science and empathy versus practicality, pragmatism, and military, and they banter kind of back and forth, and that was like the classic O'Neill banter. And then you get Mayborn, where they're basically the same. They're the same rank. They're both in the military, but they have different ethical and moral compass. and
Yeah.
they disagree with each other based on that. But at the same time, they sometimes have to work together because sometimes their compasses align in the same direction. But then
Yeah.
Wolsey, it's very interesting because he's always been the, the representative of the civilians, which is like against the military. So almost like similar to Daniel in that sense, but yet also similar to Mayborn because they had a lot of the same, I think, kind of desires as like the NID and the people that wanted to have more control over things and not just have the military have control over everything. And so I think in that sense, but like I find something about Wolsey's characters that when the more he is around them and going through these situations, the more his character becomes so like sympathetic because it's like he seems to definitely he grows and learns from the experience. Like he's clearly like when I think about Wolsey, it's like someone that he is where he is, not necessarily because he knows everything and thinks that's right, but he thinks it's right at the moment, and then he learns something through his experience of being with SG-1 and experiencing these things and seeing what it's actually meaning to be on the ground doing that. And I think that came out like when he was working with O'Neill, and their banter together was, I mean, it's great because at this point, again, they're both established as characters. Wolsey has been in SG-1 quite a bit, and like they have such differing, somehow they're so differing, but there were so many classic lines. And I mean, one of my favorites is like when they're going through the plan A, B, C, D, and whatever, and O'Neill's like, or plan F for we're, totally. Like there's so many like quotable moments from this. Like it's just brilliant.
Oh my gosh, it's funny that you bring up quotable moments because I had just seen on the Stargate United fan page that people were asking about favorite Jack O'Neill quotes.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. There's so many. Like,
Yeah, I think there was one that I put a long time ago when we first started this podcast. I'll have to find it because I don't remember the exact wording, but it always cracked me up because it was one where he's just about going through the old orifice or something.
yeah, one last jaunt through the old orifice.
Like that cracks me up. There's so many good ones.
Yeah, totally. No, there's definitely lots of nice O'Neill quotes, but I think what was probably really nice about having him come back in Atlantis is that at this point you've kind of missed out on O'Neill for, I mean, almost really 2 seasons because he wasn't also in season 8 as much, and he had kind of a different role in season 8. And so I think like you don't get him bantering quite as much with people in the same kind of way, on the same consistent level. Whereas if you go back, like I've had this experience where I started watching earlier SG-1 or something, and then you go, wow, like when he's like, they really are constantly like him and Daniel were constantly at each other. It's almost like what you described with how
that's weird. Yeah.
like McKay and Carter, how they were like at each other in the beginning, but then maybe because they like McKay kind of grew a little bit. And I think in this case, both of them probably, both Daniel and O'Neill went through quite a lot. So they probably, you get the kind of like Wolsey. I mean, he was a different Wolsey by the time he was there with O'Neill than he was when he first came into SG-1.
Yeah. And the thing that cracks up about Woolsey is he always gets in situations where he insists that he knows better in a sense, even though he hasn't experienced certain things to give that advice really. And then like they get in really bad situations where like he almost dies and he panics. And then like it's like he's just looking for like the other people to just like cradle him and like help him. And it's
true,
like
right?
he reaches that point, and then at the end, then sometimes he'll like apologize or at least somewhat admit his fault. So it's just like funny. It just cracks me up. And like also like I remember when I very first watched Stargate, like before this rewatch, like way before the very first time. And when that character first came in, all I thought was like, oh, wait, that's the actor. Like I think he was originally in like Star Trek Voyager or something like that. I think it was Voyager. And he played like a doctor and it was a very like kind, like I think wasn't he like a robotic character or something in Star Trek, I think. Like he wasn't real. Like he wasn't a real human. I think he was in Voyager, right?
I don't know
And
because I'd never seen Star Trek.
oh, okay.
I mean, I've seen like little bits of it, like that would come on TV, like, but I've never
Yeah,
actually watched it.
yeah, I've seen Voyager I had watched and there was like a few like more of like the modern day like movies I think I saw. But yeah, no, he was a really cool character in that I'm pretty sure if I'm remembering correctly, he played a doctor that was actually like a computer, like he wasn't real. And so it was like interesting to have seen him in that character to then being Woolsey, who's like this dude that's not the greatest. And so I remember like immediately like kind of noticing like, oh my gosh, that's that guy. Like I wonder if there's any other like Star Trek character like actors that ended up going on Stargate. Like I'd be curious to know.
There is,
um
I think the one, who did he play? I think he played someone called Q on Star Trek. Um, John Delancey, I think it is, but he was one of the like NID guys that now I can't remember the name of that character. But one of the guys working higher up in the NID that was usually in league with like Kinsey and stuff.
oh, okay.
I just
And
can't
he
remember
was
the
in
name of the
Star
character,
Trek.
is eluding me at the moment.
Oh, okay, I'll have to look that
Simmons,
up.
Colonel, it was like Simmons or something.
Okay.
Called Simmons.
I don't.
But yeah, and I think also Ishta was perhaps maybe, I don't know.
Who's
Or no,
Ishta?
not Ishta. Freya, I think, was on Star Trek. The character, the actor who played actress who played Freya, Anise and
Oh,
Freya.
I
I
don't.
think. So I
I'll
think
have to look
I
that
think
up.
there were
Yeah.
some. I think there were some, and I think there's like some lists of some kind of cross, as we're talking about, you know,
Yeah.
cross
Yeah.
fading or crossovers. There is some definitely cross contamination between Star Trek and Stargate, but
Cross contamination.
cross contamination. But
So here's what
what were you gonna say?
I was going to say. Here's a very important question for you.
Mhm.
Who off of SG-1 do you think would wear the panda hat best?
Oh my gosh, okay, SG-1 or Atlantis.
SG-1. Well, pick one from SG-1 and one from Atlantis. Like pick two different characters.
Okay, it's funny because I'm not sure if I'm picking the same character because I like my instinct. Okay, let's just go on instinct. Colonel O'Neill would rock this the most because he's like the most like a big teddy bear. But then I go, who would rock it the most in Atlantis? And my brain goes to Colonel Shepard because he's kind of a goof. And but then also a part of me goes, maybe Ronan. Maybe Ronan would rock it the best. I don't want. What about you? What are your thoughts on that? Which one do you think from Atlantis and SG-1?
So initially I was thinking like I think like Vala would be really cute with the panda hat on. Like
Totally,
I could
totally.
see her just kind of like wearing it thinking like what? Like why do humans wear this? Like so I could see her, but then like again like and then in Atlantis like I'm just like, oh, I could totally see Beckett wearing the panda hat.
That's
Um
true. Why didn't I
and
think
then
of
as you were talking, then I was just like in my mind thinking how funny it would be to see Ronan wearing the panda hat. And I thought that before you said Ronan, which is funny.
it?
Um, so my brain waves were traveling to your brain. But yeah, I mean, honestly, any of them could pull it off. Like, but like, yeah, it'd be really funny. Or I could see it being like this thing on like the wormhole extreme where all of them will wear their panda hats.
Yeah, would you want to see the panda version of Stargate? Because they made all those like weird remember in the episode 200 they made all of those weird versions of Stargate, and there could totally be a panda version of
Oh
Stargate.
yeah,
And
totally.
what would that be? They
I
would
mean,
just
why not?
it would just roll through the Stargate, and it would be like it would like nothing would ever happen because one of them would go through the wormhole and accidentally do a bunch of like somersaults and take out all the Jaffa, and so they never would make it through the gate, and then we'd never meet Apophis or like anything, and so there would be no Stargate. That's what would happen.
Exactly. It's perfect. Or like one of the pandas would get like really tired and floppy and just like lay there. And so then like the bad guys would think that the panda was dead and just would ignore it. So it was like faking it out.
But imagine like a panda grow old.
Like that would be terrifying, actually. That would be really terrifying. That'd be really cool though. That would be amazing. See, like we've got to start this Panda Gate.
Panda Gate. It's gonna be a thing.
Was there any last little sections of stuff you wanted to say?
I think only we just asking people like how they feel about Pegasus as a crossover and also just as a general episode. But I think also I'd be interested to hear, because we didn't mention every crossover bit, but like what people found the most interesting crossovers for people that had watched both SG-1 and Atlantis, or things they felt like maybe were more interesting when they were watching both of them versus just one.